got the film version. It looked okay.
That's nice.
Well. Start? Good evening, everyone. Let's see. There we go. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Paul Davis. I'm Curator of Collections. And this is the second program in conjunction with the exhibition Recollecting Dogon, which is just on view until July, down the hall in our what we call our East Temp Gallery. I'd just like to kindly ask if you could silence your cell phones. We're going to be watching some film clips this evening, and would hate to have them ring in the middle of them. I also wanted to just quickly introduce the topic tonight by way of a short kind of introduction. In his 1931 travel log, Jungle Ways, American author and sensationalist William Seabrook related the masks of Dogon peoples to his Euro-American readers as, quote, some of them might have been designed by the Cubists and Surrealists for an ultra-modern ballet, end quote. Yet Seabrook considered the Dogon peoples to be an isolated and primitive culture, locked in an unchanging tradition. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Historical and contemporary practices of masking, dancing, and music, some of which we were just listening to, in West Africa engage modes of being as a part of a reflexive and evolving relationship between the past and the future. As scholar French and Dogon suggests, these practices represent their distinctive path through modernity. This evening's program explores some of the ways in which these masks made by the Dogon peoples have changed throughout history and continue to change. And so tonight we'll be showing some film clips, very short clips, and interspersed with slides and discussion. I want to point out that all the film excerpts in this evening's program, because you won't be watching the whole thing, illustrating the mass dances of the Dogon people are available on the Recollecting Dogon digital publication on the Menil website. And I would suggest you check it out. There are several great essays, photography, and additional content that you can enjoy. And also, it's a true pleasure to welcome two key contributors to the Recollecting Dogon project for tonight's program, Isaïe Dougnon and Polly Richards. Isaïe is a professor of anthropology at the University of Bamako in Mali, and a visiting scholar in the African Studies program, or African Studies department at Pennsylvania State University. He is the author of multiple publications focusing on labor, migration, social cultural changes among the Dogon peoples during the colonial and post-independence periods in West Africa. Polly Richards, to my right, has been working in the Bandiagara region since 1994. She earned her PhD at the School of Oriental African Studies, or affectionately known as SOAS, in London, studying the changing mass of Dogon peoples, and has authored several articles on their significance and social changes, and the ways in which masks engage with contemporary culture. In 2000, she became an initiated female member, a Yasigine, of the exclusively male Dogon Mask Society. Several of the excerpts in tonight's program come from Mask Stories, a 2009 film project that Polly produced with Enid Schildkraut and Dana Sardet in conjunction with the Musée National du Mali and the Africa Center. And so, to begin with tonight's program, I wanted to set up this initial clip, which is from a project that a gentleman named Paul Chandler did in Mali very recently as part of a U.S. Embassy-funded project in an effort to preserve traditional music and traditional culture in West Africa. It's an extremely lovely video, and so I'll just start it right now.
De lava juga anga ub ahi. Ema anga go sumli fenaili. Lava juga anga e sumye. Lava sumye fenaili. Lava juga anga go sumye. Anga ub sumye fenaili. Lava juga anga e sumye. Lava sumye fenaili. De la juga anga go ahi. Ema anga go sumye fenaili. Lava juga anga e sumye. Lava sumye fenaili.
Osiza jogo ba eme ko gan yega ni gin ko. O ko ni o. Tiri ko la tori. Ko le mo panga sene. So go mo eme nyon ko. Na de ni tiri ko na. So pay Amazon. Ime dagi walai.
So it's as an introduction to masking in Dogon country, it's a pretty powerful example. However, as we were discussing earlier, it's a pretty produced version of it as well. And so some of the films that you'll see tonight are less of a commissioned piece, and you will be able to see some of the differences between the two. Isaïe, did you want to?
Yeah, so I would like just to make clear that Dogon country is quite big. It's 23,000 quadrat kilometers, meters. And masks are mostly in cliff and plateau region, but most of the Dogon the majority lives in plain. So you see the Seno plain, the vast majority of Dogon live in this part, but it's unknown. It doesn't interest researchers and tourists. So it is really like not considered as part of the Dogon country, which people, the part that people know well is the cliff and the plateau.
So this is a slide just to introduce you to a range of the different mask types that exist throughout the region. There are approximately 50 different mask types that can be found today throughout the region, and the headpieces vary from wooden to fiber. And basically, as Paul said earlier, this is a society for men, and all of these masks are worn by men, and they represent both people, animals, and things that the Dogon encounter in their daily life. And this is a map that contradicts the previous maps, really, but it shows where the Dogon people are in the world in terms of masks, where you can find masks performing throughout the world. So it was actually a map I made in 2008 of one mask troupe from the Sangha region, which is kind of one of the main Dogon villages. And it shows you that actually they're performing right throughout the world. There'd probably be many more dots on it today if you were to do an up-to-date version. And this is just one example of a mask performance in 2003 at the Royal Festival Hall in London. So it really has become a worldwide phenomena.
Yeah, this is a clear example that this is not like isolated, as you heard, isolated country or isolated population, primitive living only in caves and unknown, right?
Along the
this,
escarpment,
yeah,
yeah.
it has a long history of connecting with wider world.
So the next clip we're going to show you is of a couple of different people talking about the tradition of the masks and why it happens and what happens when it happens, just to kind of introduce you to some of the key issues.
And this is your film from Mask
This
Stories.
is, yeah, an excerpt from my film.
Aujourd'hui, tous les hommes dansent au masque, puisque c'est une obligation d'accomplir ces rites. Tous ceux qui sont restés dans la tradition sont tenus de l'exécuter.
Ça prend 2 ans pour faire les funérailles. C'est très cher. Le funérailles, c'est très très cher. C'est plus cher que tout au pays Dogon. Il faut beaucoup de bière de mil, il faut beaucoup de repas, il faut beaucoup de la crème de mil pour accueillir les gens qui vont venir de loin pour les funérailles. Et donc ça coûte très très cher. Il faut économiser du mil pendant 2 ou 3 ans pour organiser. Et le village va t'aider aussi. Le village, tes voisins, ils vont amener du mil. Chacun amène un peu de mil pour organiser. Danse de terrasse, c'est la personne là où il vivait. Et donc, quand il monte sur la terrasse, ça veut dire que le propriétaire de la maison qui est parti. La terrasse, c'est là où il avait son âme, sur la terrasse. L'âme est en haut. Donc, il monte en haut pour accompagner l'âme. Pour que les mauvaises ne viennent pas à la famille des autres qui vivent dans cette famille.
So it's interesting to compare this clip with the one that came before, where they're talking about the mask coming out for money. So can you talk a little bit about, I mean, both of you, can you talk a little bit about this idea of why masks come out? I mean, they come out for the Dhamma, and what is the Dhamma?
Yeah, so the main reason that masks come out is for post-burial rites. So in the Dogon region, when you die, you get buried straight away. But as they say in the clip, it takes a long while to actually gather together enough money to perform these rituals. So the rituals that happen are for male elders that have died throughout the villages. And the Dharma, which is, it's like a month-long ritual that commemorates the end of mourning. That's usually commemorated for several elders who have died throughout a longer period. It could be up to 10 years or even longer, depending on how good a harvest they've had and how long it takes to gather the kind of essential foodstuffs to perform the ritual. So then the other way in which masks have started performing, and I think this has probably been going on for a century, is in secular contexts. So it could be anything from, in the early 1900s, it was to welcome visiting dignitaries to the region, so colonial administrators and such like. And then over the last century, for any major event like the opening of a new road, a hospital, or school, there's always been an occasion to bring out masks to dance. And then increasingly for tourists arriving in the area. So the song refers to this kind of economic transaction that happens for such events, whether it's the arrival of a kind of visiting dignitary or for tourists.
And I think this is something you can touch on too a little bit, because we're talking about the economy and the exchange of masks and this broad community of support for the Dhamma and the way it engages us in the international community of Dogon peoples.
Yeah. It is not collecting millet from villages, but also receiving money from migrants who are outside. So even the civil servant, the Dogon who are civil servant, highly ranked.
Or the big businessmen.
Big businessmen, they have to contribute. It is,
to supporting the Dhamma or the big festivals, And so the masks come into play as in terms of exchange and economics in many ways.
Yeah, and then this is a really key photograph from the 1930s, which shows one of the main people that really started recording and documenting Mars. So Marcel Griol, the French anthropologist, who went out there with a big team to document Dogon life, and then he actually ended up focusing on the Mars as part of his PhD. And here you can see him with one of his main informants, a man called Ambire Dolo, and he's actually in the process of talking about a particular mask, which is called a Kanaga mask. But actually, as part of his work, he also collected over 2,000 objects, including a large proportion of which were masks, and he brought them back to a big museum in Paris called the Quai Branly. So here you see excerpts from his PhD, which then became a very well-known published book called Mask Dogon. And he recorded the mask that he saw absolutely meticulously with these incredible drawings and photographs, recording in real depth the variety of different stars throughout the region as he observed it. And then you can see he's also taking photographs, early photographs of the time, and then actually collecting everything he saw in the photographs. So he brings this back, and there you see this display in the Quai Branly that pretty much remained unchanged from then onwards. I mean, I visited the Quai Branly in 1990 and saw pretty much this display in this form in the vitrine there. So it's quite a significant moment, because even though there were people before him that went to the Dogon region, wrote about it and collected masks, he was the one who kind of really brought them to the attention of the Western world.
And this too, I mean, this is the 1931 Exposition Coloniale Internationale.
Yeah, so I think, Isaïe, you're going to talk about this slide.
Yeah, but okay, my focus is still on migration. So this is a kind of this is an evidence that this country were always been connected to the colonial world and to rest of the European culture. So this Dogon dance, mask dance in 1931, and from that, and before that, they were migrating to Ghana during the British time, and it.
It's like during the 1920s.
Yeah.
And I think for the Menil collection and the history of the Menil, this is actually a really important slide, because this is Paris in 1931. And the de Menils were married in Paris in 1931. And so this is what was happening in the metropole, of the colonial metropole at the time. These cultures were coming to the de Menils' doorstep, literally. And this was a major exhibition that took over much of Paris and attracted millions of visitors. And so it's highly likely that we know that they attended this, but we don't know that they saw the Dogon troupe performing. But nevertheless, it makes an interesting case for an exhibition about the history of collecting Dogon art and the exhibition of Dogon art, and that transfer of cultural knowledge from Mali to France to the United States via collectors. And so in the exhibition, we were trying, spent a long time talking about the ways in which masks on display aren't active. They don't move. And that's a very important part of the mask.
So, and the other thing that I think is interesting about the exhibition is that Paul sets up these very interesting contrasts between the past and the present by the positioning of some of the objects alongside each other. The other thing not to forget is that the room itself is full of what are essentially power objects. The sculpture in the foreground is actually used as part of sacrifice and kind of a way of actually getting, in this case, fertility as part of the Dogon indigenous religion, But the masks themselves are all power objects, and they're powerful not only through the material themselves that the mask is made of, but also the process of making masks, particularly dyeing fibers, is a way in which power and energy is transferred to the mask that the performer then wears. But also before the performer actually performs in the mask, they then undergo a process of entrusting their mask to the mask altar, and by association to Amma, which is the name for God, and then when they're performing it, essentially the energy is transferred to the village, and it becomes a kind of source of vitality for the whole village, as well as being a powerful thing in itself.
I think that sets up the next clip.
So the next film is different people, including the smith in one of the villages, talking about the energies of masks and why they're dangerous. So just to give you an idea of how dangerous they are.
À côté des masques, puisque j'ai été initié, je n'ai pas tellement peur. Mais je me méfie un peu des masques qui viennent des autres villages. Excusez-moi, ça, je me méfie. Hein. Voilà, parce que souvent, c'est autre chose. Hein, un masque qui vient de Yéné, un masque qui vient de Kotanga, c'est pas pareil à un masque qui vient de mon quartier. Est-ce que vous voyez? Bon, il y a un truc mystique là-dedans. Voilà, il y a un truc mystique là-dedans et qui peut me déranger ou bien qui déranger le masque. Donc vraiment, je me méfie.
Sabe gama binbo ya do de in na wunda kedo. Imbanda kale do de in ta kedo. Bon gama u la wunya gama ya do de kumbe ke wonguruna. So ta. La jiko le dige nyawo woki. Nyawo woki. E panga woki nyawo.
So one of the interesting things in that clip is they talk about the power of the mask, but also how dangerous masks are for women. So it's important to note that women are excluded from the mask society, and as you can see, they're very particularly dangerous to pregnant women. And they potentially have the power to cause a pregnant woman to miscarry, but also to kind of stop you from being fertile as a woman. So the only women that are enabled to join the mask society are the yasigni, and I think you need to press it to get a next slide. And here you see an example of several yasigni holding their ritual ladle, which they use to dance with. And so this is a status conferred on very few women in each village, and usually it's a status either that's inherited through subsequent generations, so it's like the granddaughter of a previous yasigni who gets this role, or it's assigned to someone retrospectively who has maybe gone a bit mad, and then it's attributed to her having gone mad because of the power of the mask. Maybe she got too close to it. Or in my case, because I was working with masks, it was seen as a kind of protective measure because I hadn't had children at that point in time. And they knew that I was going to be working with masks over a long period of time and approaching their altars, so they didn't want me to harm their altars. So it was kind of a logical, practical step to protect both me and them by initiating me into it. So the next clip we're going to show talks about women and masks a bit more, and here what you see is a slightly different attitude of women who are actually a bit more, have become a bit more liberated in their approach. So men would always say to me, well, women can't talk about masks at all, and if I tried to interview them, they'd say, well, you're not going to get anything from them because they don't know anything about the masks. But what you'll see in the next clip is actually women know quite a good deal about masks, and they've got something to say about it too.
n'es pas Yesigna, tu n'es jamais approché des masques. Tu ne peux pas approcher.
C'est interdit. En parlant, on dit que si tu t'approches des masques, ça peut te faire tomber. C'est ça qu'on me dit. On dit parfois que tu vas mourir aussi. Mais en entendant ça, je n'ai jamais arrivé. Je pensais que c'est un grand totem. Si on arrive près d'un masque, si une femme arrive près d'un masque, elle va mourir. C'est ça que moi j'ai pensé. Ma première fois de voir les masques, donc j'avais eu très peur. Donc on était à plus de 20 mètres ou 30 mètres qu'on voyait les desks de masques. Donc on avait très peur. La nuit, je faisais des rêves que les masques me cherchaient. Je courais parfois pour rentrer dans les chambres, pour monter même sur les arbres en rêve, à cause des masques. J'avais des danses plus beaux que d'autres. Par exemple, le Tingitanga. C'était très joli à voir en dansant. Il y avait 2 bois longs et un homme monté sur un bois long comme ça qui dansait. 3 sortes de danses. Donc c'était très joli. J'étais très contente de voir le Tingitanga. Mais j'ai peur s'il tombe. Saluons les vieux, saluons les vieilles. On est en haut. Priez pour nous, pour que nous descendons en bonne santé, pour nous sauver des accidents.
Ils marchent des Kanaga et ils dansent comme ça pour tourner la terre. C'est ça que j'aime, le masque des Kanaga.
Yeah, so as you have seen, women in Dogon country also start migrating as men. During early colonial time, even early independence time, women migrate as spouse, going with them, going to join their husband who got job in colonial or post-colonial cities. But today, single women migrate and they came into the cities, they sell their labor, go back to the Dogon country, and the gender relationship changed a lot, and they can talk openly about masks and about all these secret societies.
So the slide that you're seeing here shows you the way that women are represented in masks. So even though women don't actually dance masks, they're always worn by men. There are quite a large number of masks that represent women. So in this case, these 2 masks represent the Yasigni, and on the left hand you see a version of the mask that was collected by Grill in the 30s, and on the right hand is a more recent version that I photographed in 1996. And what we're beginning to talk about now is some of the ways that masks have evolved. So one of the ways in which masks have evolved is there's been an increasing naturalism that's appeared in the mask form. So you can see by contrast with the form on the left, the version on the right it's got a shorter body. So instead of the kind of really elongated abstract form, it's based much more closely on the human form. And then also they've introduced details like the Yasigni ladle, and in the right hand is a cockerel that would be used for sacrifice. So, and then they've introduced little details like the eye holes, which are in the form of a grain store.
And really embellished it too.
So yeah, they've really added a lot of new materials. So this is something I'm going to talk about in the subsequent slides. But if you just see some of the glittery decoration on here, that's actually from sardine cans that have been cut up into strips and added to ornament the mask. So the sardine cans are some of the items that would be brought into the region as a result of tourists being in the area and needing to eat food that's ready to eat. So they're reusing that.
I'm just thinking about this in terms of what Seabrook wrote and how Cubists seemed like they designed the mask, and just looking at the figure, how it's elongated, it does make sense.
Yeah.
His statement. So next slide. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this is another mask that represents women, which is called a Puloyana, and it represents Fulani women. Fulani are the nomadic group that neighbor the Dogon, and they have quite a reciprocal relationship. The Fulani women supply the Dogon people with milk, and have very beautiful women. So this is actually a satirical mask, and when it dances, quite often it has Fulani men around it that are fanning the mask, and then the mask is overcome with exhaustion and has a fainting fit. So it's seen as quite a funny mask to watch, and it's basically satirizing Fulani, who are perceived as being quite lazy. So that's why it collapses in a heap when it dances. But the headpiece in the middle, what you can see is you can see the decoration more clearly. So this is an example again of recycled new materials coming into the area and being absorbed into the headpiece. And if you look at the next slide, Paul, or maybe it's the previous one, sorry. What you see is that they're actually, in their view, they are imitating what real Fulani hairstyles are like. But in a kind of satirical way. So the Fulani women have these incredibly high crests on the top of their head, and they put all sorts of ornaments and coins and beads to decorate it. So what the Dogon mask is doing is imitating in a slightly satirical way this incredible kind of brilliance and dazzling ornament at the top of the crest, but using cut-up pill packets and monosodium glutamate wrappers and watch straps and sardine can staples.
I love the costume too, which is something we haven't talked about actually really quickly, is that the costume is actually part of the entire, is actually the mask. It's not
so
just
the whole
face
thing,
mask.
it's not just the headpiece, it's the whole costume, and the performance represents the mask.
So he has fake breasts. This is a male dancer dressed as a woman, so lots of gender bending happening in the masquerades, and plays on, well, we were talking about this earlier, female power.
Yeah, so basically what, they would never say it in this way, but men, by wearing masks, are kind of appropriating the energy and fertility of women. So the mask can only travel around the village on the main roads that are used by menstruating women, and there's all sorts of parallels with women's fertility. And so this is something we were going to talk about, is the way that new materials have started coming into the area. And really, what's interesting is that Grill wrote, when he did his thesis, he wrote about new materials beginning to be used. And he wrote about them in a very derogatory way. He basically said that all the new materials were of an inferior quality, and that masks were no longer being made with the care that they'd been made before. But the thing is that the indigenous preparation of masks took a phenomenally long time, using indigenous kind of fruits and plants for a less dazzling effect. So for the people making these masks, actually these new materials are a much more appropriate way of achieving the desired effect, which is to dazzle their audience and create something that's absolutely brilliant and catches your eye and impresses you with its kind of power and brilliance. So what you see on the left here are some examples of new materials. They're not always what you would expect. At the bottom, you've got inks that are quite straightforward, and they come from probably from Saudi Arabia in powdered form, and they're then fixed with potassium. But there's also been kind of various inventive uses of new materials, such as the use of a powdered drink that you can see in the top left corner that was basically would stain everything orange, so you can imagine what it did to your stomach. But they would use this to dye the fibers. And so what has happened is that the fibers have moved from being very rigidly red, black, and yellow to being this kind of complete cacophony of different hues. And for the Dogon themselves, they in the villages where they have this cacophony, they think it's absolutely fantastic, and they will enhance the brilliance of the colours by rubbing oil into the fibres and into the mask so that they shine with their brilliance when they perform. But in the villages that are more frequented by tourists, they keep the colours more subdued. So they'll keep the colours to the rigid black, red, yellow, because they know that tourists arrive there with an expectation of them being like that, and so they'll satisfy the expectation and then do something for themselves elsewhere.
Yeah, to fit into what she said is these young Dogon to dance, mask, or to celebrate these rituals, funerals, they went to Ghana to buy Europeans' clothing, right? They said there are everything in Mali, only the modern clothing. And they went to Ghana during British time to buy clothing, knives, the Ashanti knives or swords, and many other items in order to come back to Dogon country and celebrate the rituals of Dharma. So it is so interesting, and how the Dogon, even this society is a really secret society, initiated men migrated outside to bring new materials, new items, in order to make the celebration more powerful. And it is, again, it is an evidence that this part of Mali were never been closed, never been so primitive, as stated at the beginning, the American traveler.
Yeah.
And this slide shows two different headpieces that cover the back of the wearer's head when they're wearing a mask, where instead of using the traditional fibre that's been woven, they've appropriated items that they've found. So in the left-hand side, what you have is a burlap, it's a burlap sack that's been cut up and turned into a fibre head covering and had its stripes painted on it. And then on the right-hand side is like a rag rug that someone's obviously found in a market and identified it as being a kind of a new version of the fibre head covering. So they've absorbed this into their tradition. And this kind of appropriation of, as Isaïe said, of found objects is not just happening in the mask, it's happening in every aspect of Dogon culture. And sometimes they actually, when they're using something new, they use a little bit of the old thing. So in some cases, when people are using new paints, they use a tiny bit of the indigenous paint, indigenous dye, and dip it in that first before they use the new paint. So there is a kind of sense that the techniques that their ancestors used still have a kind of high value to them. In terms of maybe energy or just kind of continuing the tradition. But then they're very happy to use something new and consider that equally successful in achieving their aim of having something attractive. And then this is something that really shows individualization. So Isaïe's going to talk a bit about the change in society that has led to masks like this having people's names on them.
Yeah, this is one of the less known aspects of Dogon society, change, social change. It is rare to see from the French or other writings that this society is really changing in a hectic pace, and because people migrating, there are shortage of land, water, and there are a lot of conflicts, and the idea of common origin, common ancestors are slowly disappearing. There are a lot of yeah, if you look Dogon country from the mask perspective, you would have sense that, oh, this is so nice society, like pristine,
unchanged. But if you go there, actually, in this part of Mali, many people are living. As I said earlier, the majority does not live in the cliffs and plateau. They live in the plain, where trade, cattle breeding is rising, and so this leads to many conflicts. And people are fighting for ownership, for me, and getting property, not sharing with the big family. So I'm not saying that there is no solidarity among, but there are a lot of conflicts, and conflicts are mostly caused by this sense of individuality. The individualization of this Dogon society is going as rapid as the other Malian societies. So it has been mentioned because many the travel agencies from Europe, United States, they present this part of Mali peaceful, and it's just like it never changed.
So this sense of kind of the individual and oneself being expressed through the mask can be seen in this photo. So on the left-hand side, you see that the headpiece has a number 2 on it, and that's because the dancer considered himself to be the second best dancer of this mask in the village, so he put a number 2 on it. And on the right-hand side, it was at the turn of the millennium, the villager, this is before then, the villager put his name on it, and also, so he's called Ali, and you can see Ali written just above the date. And also, then he starts playing with lettering to kind of show off the fact that he's been schooled and knows how to write. But also, it's got his village, which was Ijeli Yene. So he's very proud to assert both his name and where he's from on the headpiece itself.
It's signed artwork.
So it's a signed artwork, yeah.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about 2 masks that are less well known, and which is both a mask called Ajagai or Saku mask, and also leaf masks. And one of the reasons these masks are less well known is because they're much harder to collect. The Saku mask is made from the bark of a tree, and the same tree, the leaves of that tree, is used to make the Sanagore leaf mask. So even though Grill wrote about these 2 masks, he couldn't bring the leaf mask back with him because it would just die. And he did bring the bark mask back, but it rarely gets exhibited because it's just a kind of crisp, basically. So what you can see is the mask on the right-hand side dancing. This is the Ajagai mask, or also known as the Saku. And it has a very different role to other masks. During the performance, it acts like a policeman and controls people and chases people who shouldn't be watching away from the edge. So it's quite aggressive. Historically, this was the mask that led the way during battles. So any war between different Dogon ethnic groups or with neighboring groups, this mask would have been at the front of that battle procession. And also historically, this was the mask that if within a village they decided to judge a criminal and execute a criminal, which happened historically, this would be the mask that would undertake it. So it's actually another word for this mask is asa. It's considered the original mask that was found in the bush, which is kind of the origin of masks. And it's nowadays it's still considered one of the most powerful masks, but rarely do you see it because, as I said, it's so hard to collect. And then the next mask is the leaf mask. Oh. So this is what the leaf masks look like, which you will never see in a gallery for obvious reasons. But what's really interesting about this mask is it's an original stage of initiation into the adult masking society. So the next clip we're going to show you talks about these stages of entry, and you can see the mask dancing in it.
So we'll show a series of 2 clips and pause for.
Sana kuri gara. Sana kuri no garo andi gagara andi toi be andi per na don yuno. Permer adungu dué adungu wa sana kuri antang.
Pour être initié à cette société, il faut être homme et être circoncis, puisque l'initiation de l'homme commence à partir de l'âge de la circoncision, une fois qu'on quitte la puberté.
So there he's saying that's for entrance into the adult masking society, you have to be circumcised. And that's a later stage of entry, whereas the leaf mask is a kind of much more of a playful thing. They come out just before the rainy season when people start to sow their crops, and they literally run through the villages chasing small children who usually kind of torment them. There's a number of different of kind of torments that they're kind of like little poems that children learn to torment the Sanagoroi, and they can get caught and held by Sanagoroi. So in the next clip, what you'll see more clearly is how the Sanagoroi leaf masks are imitating the adult masks, and it's a kind of becomes a stage of them learning how to perform the adult masks.
And then just quickly to further set up this next clip, it's actually by a gentleman named Seru Dolo, who's been was given video equipment by a Dutch-Swiss photographer, and he's been working he lives in the Dogon region and has been working there post the 2012 coup d'etat in Mali, and so these are kind of home videos, but they're fantastic. So can you imagine running down the cliff of a face covered in leaves? it's funny because it reminds me of climbing those cliffs several times. Anyway, so we just want to conclude with this image here, which kind of gives you, it's one of Pauli's images that really demonstrates the kind of dynamism of a performance, the dust, the dirt, in still. And yeah, thank you. And if you have questions, well, we're willing and ready to take them. No? Okay, there we go.
So it's my understanding that sometimes it takes a few years to organize this funeral dance. In their belief, what happens with the soul of the death person if it has to wait so long in between? What happens to the soul?
Yeah, so in their belief, it's errant. I mean, it's basically hanging around in the village, isn't that right, Isaïe? And has potential to cause damage if it's not properly sent on its way to the other world. So that's what happens during the Dharma. That seals the moment, and it's not just the performance of Mass. It's actually the rituals that go on in private that are the kind of definitive moment at which the soul is kind of properly sent on its way. So up until that point, the soul of the deceased is roaming and is kind of errant and potentially harmful.
The bodies are buried immediately.
The bodies are buried immediately.
Yeah. Because the Dogon they hate the notion of paradise and hell. So for them, the soul goes to join the ancestors. And if they do not do this funeral, as she said, he'll be turning around and waiting until he is welcomed by the ancestors.
And I think a good example of that, just quickly, is the work that's by Ale Kiniato in the exhibition. He's drawing after losing his arm during a funeral to his a black powder rifle exploding. He lost his elbow from his elbow down, and it was because of malevolent spirits that he attributes the loss of his arm, his rifle exploding.
I thought it was interesting that the grass leaf mask was the first one kind of you initiate into, and it made me think. I'm a teacher. And I teach kindergarten and now elementary, and it's kind of the way that kids sometimes start to communicate with each other by playing, putting on a show. And it kind of made me think about how people say it's like the start of civilization in these type of areas, and that it made it become more so because of these masks and these rituals and that kind of celebration. It brings people together. You start to do shows, and it's for reasons. And I thought that was very interesting. That went to that basic of nature with the leaves and then fiber and then wood.
Yeah, and actually you see even younger children at kindergarten age, interestingly, they use all sorts of things. So they'll use millet stalks, millet's like the main crop that's grown, and they'll use the stalks to create kanaga mask headpieces. And then, or they'll just pick up a cardboard box and stick that on and put whatever they can find on a skirt. So you can see, kids from the moment they can walk, basically learning to dance and imitating the dance. And that process of imitation is the kind of early stage of training.
Okay, I'm intrigued by the mask makers themselves. Is it an ancestral profession where it's passed down from family, talking about the energy that comes from the mask to the person getting it? And the one man expressed that he was wary of other masks from different communities. So are the masks just done in that community unique? I mean, is it by color or is it by material? What makes them unique to each spot?
Masks are considered to be owned by the village. So each village has obviously their society, even though it's part of a kind of bigger whole. I think historically that danger comes from fear of being caught by a mask and being killed. I mean, the masks historically were that dangerous that historically, potentially, you would, during a Dharma period, you'd have a much more powerful sacrifice to your mask altar if you caught a person than caught an animal. So there's a kind of genuine fear that has lingered to today, and that's what he was referring to. He'd be cautious, and there are certain public totems. There's a big pole called, which actually you can't see in this image. It was in a previous image, but there's this kind of wooden pole that's part of an altar, and that's like a public symbol to other people in other villages to. If it's in place, that means that the important sacrifice has taken place to plant it in the ground. But if it's not in place, then you steer clear of that village, basically. So I think that's what he's talking about there. And there is kind of real fear between villages. But there are certain villages that, in terms of ancestors, you have a kind of familial relationship with. So you wouldn't necessarily be afraid of all villages. In terms of your question about the makers, in principle, all men have to learn the skill of making masks, so they'll get that from their elder men in their village. In reality, as you would expect, not everyone can turn their hand to it. Some might have a go and be really bad at it, so they'll help out in other ways. It's a very kind of communal process within the kind of shelter where mask preparations take place. You literally have all men from that community lending their hand in some way to the preparation. But then within each community, you quite often have specialists. So whether it's the smith, or there might be someone who's just got really good at making masks, whether it's weaving them or carving them. And so they then get a reputation for being good. And in some cases, people then commission them, sometimes pay them, or there might be a reciprocal payment, or it's just they do it for free, but if you really want a really great one, then you'll go to a professional to get it made. So the smith that was carving it was showing that.
Yeah, related to your question about the society of mask is, first of all, a secret society, and each village has its own secret society, and the code, the password are different from one village to another. So if you are initiated in your village, you know your password. If his mask is coming, and you know how to reply if he makes some sort of sign. And if you don't understand, it will be dangerous for you. So this is why he's saying I am scaring from the mask coming outside, because he doesn't understand the code. So it is in many secret societies you have to, the rights are different. So it is the same in the mask society.
Okay, so trailing on her question, the mask maker in the beginning mentioned that there are masks that are protected or infused, and there are masks that aren't. So with that in mind, and coming back around to migration, tourism, are these masks that tourists see not exactly those same initiated masks?
They are largely the same. I think the masks that you see in some of the, they have stalls. So they have small kind of stalls at the roadside selling masks to tourists. Those wouldn't be masks that had been entrusted to the mask altar. And if occasionally it does happen that people do try and sell masks that have been entrusted to tourists, but they wouldn't do it in a shop. It might happen in secret, and they'd be taking a risk, or they'd be suing themselves to take a risk, because basically they're selling something that then has effectively become it's kind of part of the altar, and it has the energy of that altar. So it's more likely that harm could come to you or your family if you then try and sell that object. But I think what's really interesting is that over time, Dogon people have found a way of negotiating this tradition, so that what remains sacred to them remains sacred. But actually, and Sekou Dolo, who we saw in the film, puts this very well, a lot of the mass performance is kind of like a ceremonial framing to the really important secret rituals that happen in private, away from anyone's eyes. So what you're seeing is this kind of public commemoration that really there's no harm performing it for tourists in the way that they're performing it for themselves. But what's not going on are the sacred rituals that go on in private during the funeral rituals. So for tourists, the mask will just come out. They won't have been protected on the day. Sometimes there are ways of protecting yourself as a dancer that they won't do on the day for tourists. So they might rub something special, you won't necessarily know what it is, into their skin, or they might wear protective charms either around their neck or around their waist, so they wouldn't wear that if they were dancing for tourists, because the risk isn't there. Basically, it's only tourists watching. It's not kind of your neighbour from another village. And what they're fearing is someone from another village coming and wanting to do them harm. So while they're, say, dancing on a stilt dance, they're worried that someone from another village might in some way cause them to fall and break their bones, or in some way kind of want to wish them evil or wish them ill. So there's a lot going on. It's quite complex and quite powerful. You don't want to mess with them.
The females that are chosen for to be part of the ceremony, do you know how are they selected for that?
Yeah, so as I said at the beginning, there's kind of different ways. It's either inherited, or it may be that in some way you've become mad, and so that's when it's been deemed that actually in some way retrospectively you have to become initiated so that it can help you, because it's thought that the energy of the mask has then affected you. But there's a kind of payment to the mask society that you make when you join, and then there's a whole sequence of kind of stages to your initiation.
And then there are responsibilities later.
And then there's responsibilities for the rest of your life, which, as I'm now realizing. Yeah, primarily. So every dance, there's huge amounts of millet beer that gets drunk at the end, usually a bit before, and then at the end, once the dance has taken place. All of the men in the mass society gather with the yasigni, and they have this big communal drinking session. So that's an awful lot of beer. If you imagine that sometimes these rituals take 5 or 6 weeks, and at each mass session, each time they dance, they'll need to be millet. And there are other offerings. So sometimes, like the masked chief gets presented with honey. There's different ritual objects that get used. There's certain ritual sacrifice where there might be a chicken on the that's sacrificed on part of every single male elder that's died. So there's an enormous number of different foodstuffs and items that have to be gathered before you can undertake it. So usually you have to wait until you've had a really good harvest to be able to carry it out.
The number of invitees is very high. People come from all over the Dogon country. Even those who are outside, they come to participate. So it is not only food and drinks are not only for the village. It is for all people invited, and it is really big feast. Even from people come from Europe to participate in this funeral. So it is it is really costly.
And they announce it on the radio now, so
it is costly.
So then the message goes out, and of course with mobile phones, there's no excuse for not making your contribution.
It is the only time you can see very beautiful dance and singing of mask. The Dogon music is not very developed, but the song related to funerals are very nice. I mean, the most powerful song, and it is once, and then next funeral, which can take like 20 years, I don't know. It takes time. So this is why it attracts a lot of people, and you have to be able to feed them. It is a shame, great shame for the village if the MVT complain about shortage of beer or food. It is terrible.
I think one more question.
So speaking to that and migration, are these only practiced when they come back to the village? Like if you talk about how a lot of people migrate because of economic pressures, do they take aspects of this with them that somehow inflect where they settle? Or are these kinds of practices really only back in the home village?
Migration has two main phases. What I say, the colonial migration is for clothing, for European items. This is like coming back, and it is and speaking English or Ashanti language is like a social promotion. And these people who went to the colonial cities, they are already initiated in mask. And when they come back, they are more respectful in the mask society than others who never left the village. So after the drought, 70s and 80s drought, people migrate for cash to get money. And it is, though even this wave of the post-drought migration also has impact on the individualization of mask, as she said. I don't know if I understand well your question.
I think one more. I can't turn down Ted.
I just wanted to ask about the choreography, because there's this really nice scene where the women are explaining the gesture and the meaning behind that gesture. So I guess the question's twofold. Is dancing generally organized in that way that all the movement is symbolic or narrative? And does the choreography over time transmute from generation to generation, or are the dances fairly stable and you have to learn them a certain way?
I think traditions don't survive by being unchanging, so inevitably traditions evolve. And given that, according to their myth of origin, there was only ever one mask, and now you've got 50, and at one point, historically, you had 100. Clearly, these dances have evolved over time. I wasn't studying how the dances have evolved, but I know just from the way people talked about them that they had kind of added in certain things of their own. But what's interesting about the Dogon tradition is, unlike other masking traditions like Gelede, there's no overt or very little overt acknowledgement of change. So their legitimization of the tradition is based on it being something that's gone on forever and ever and ever. And even if they have clearly invented something, they very rarely tell you, or they very rarely kind of acknowledge it. And that's part of that is the kind of commonality of the tradition. It's about not drawing attention to yourself as having kind of done something new. And part of that is legitimizing it by saying, we've been doing this for as long as we have. I think what really surprised me going out there is the effort they put into rehearsing the dances. And as a visitor, you've no idea of this because you turn up and you just see them perform, whereas what you don't realize is in the run-up to the main dances, every single evening they're rehearsing to get those moves right. And also what you're not really aware of from these videos is that there's a secret language for the Society of the Mask. So what you have is elders who know how to communicate with them during the performances in a secret language. And the words that they're saying to communicate with them are basically critical commentary on how they're dancing. So they'll be saying, straighten up, or get in time with the drum, you're out of step. All these things that most visitors, Dogon visitors as well, won't understand because they won't know what the language is. But the dance is absolutely paramount. So you can have a mask that doesn't look great, but be a fabulous dancer. And that became clearer to me. It was like, in a way, I was studying the wrong thing. The thing that they really valued was the dance. And so there's a kind of perception of what the right dance steps are. And that was kind of village bound, and they were very particular about getting it right. So I think that perception evolves, but it's kind of confined within their own milieu, as it were. So.
Well, I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to ECI and Paulie for coming, and thank you all for joining us this evening. And do check out the Recollecting Dogon digital publication on the Menil website if you have a chance. Thank you very much.